King Lear was written in 1606 by William Shakespeare. It tells the story of an aging king, Lear, and how his retirement leads to a tragedy. And yes, in this play, kings can retire. Act 1. The play opens with the Earl of Gloucester joking about his illegitimate son, Edmund, with the Earl of Kent. Shortly after, King Lear, the Duke of Albany, the Duke of Cornwall enter, along with the king's daughter, Goneril the eldest, Regan the middle child, and Cordelia the youngest. Lear chooses to split his kingdom based on which daughter loves him the most. Goneril and Regan tell poetic lies, which Lear is unaware of at this point in the play, while Cordelia can't say anything. Goneril and Regan split the kingdom up, while Cordelia is banished. A servant of the king, Kent, is also banished since he attempts to stand up for Cordelia. But that's okay, because the King of France is like, I'll take Cordelia with me anyway. Shortly after, Edmund is ranting about his inability to inherit his father's wealth due to the illegitimacy of his birth and his hatred of his legitimate brother Edgar, so he begins to plot. He first manipulates his father with a forged letter from his brother. The letter explains Edgar's plans to betray Gloucester. Gloucester sets off to arrest Edgar. Edmund then tries to trick his brother into fearing his father's wrath. Back to the Lear family. Having renounced his crown, Lear decides to spend the rest of his days with his two daughters. First, he lives with Goneril. She quickly gets sick of him. But before fighting ensues, Kent comes back disguised in order to continue serving Lear. Anyway, Lear and Goneril clash until Lear decides to go live with Regan instead. Goneril sends a letter to warn her sister. Lastly, before the act ends, Lear sends a disguised Kent, a man who Lear just met, to deliver a letter to Gloucester. Act 2. Act 2 begins with Edmund tricking Edgar into self-banishment. Gloucester confirms the rumors of Edgar to Regan and Cornwall. Gloucester sentences Edgar to death and claims Edmund as his one true son and rightful heir. Shortly after this, the play switches to following the adventures of a disguised Kent. He arrives at Gloucester's house with the letter from Lear. He meets Goneril's servant Oswald there too. Kent insults Oswald and proceeds to attack him. In response to this, Cornwall places Kent in the stocks. Jumping to Edgar really quick, he gives a soliloquy discussing how he's an outlaw and will disguise himself as a poor dirty beggar known as Poor Tom. Lear and his fool find a disguised Kent in the stocks. He's pissed and only gets more pissed when Regan and Cornwall refuse to see him. Eventually, they come out and release Kent. After Goneril arrives, Lear gets into an argument with both of his daughters. The argument ends with the sisters agreeing to host their father only if he dismisses all of his servants and knights. Enraged by this, Lear storms out into a storm, followed by his fool. Act 3. Act 3 opens with a lot of exposition. First, Lear and his fool are outside in a crazy storm. Second, Albany and Cornwall are fighting. And third, the King of France is sending his troops to England. This is all told to a random person by Kent. Kent also sends this random person to Dover to report on Lear's growing madness. Lear and his fool wander around in a vicious storm. Lear curses at the storm and at his daughters. He probably would have stayed like that all night if Kent didn't find them and lead them to a shelter. Back to the Gloucesters. Gloucester tells Edmund that he wants to help and support Lear. He also shares that he received a letter describing the French troops in England. Being the little greedy pig he is, Edmund plots to gain his inheritance faster by betraying his father. He plans to report that Gloucester supports Lear instead of Regan and Goneril to Cornwall. To the characters in the storm again. Once Lear, his fool, and Kent have found shelter, they end up finding Poor Tom, also known as Edgar, in a hovel. Gloucester eventually finds them all and leads them to a hut. At this point, Edmund has told Cornwall about Gloucester's betrayal and provides the letter as evidence. Cornwall makes Edmund the Earl of Gloucester on the spot. Back to the guys in the huts. Gloucester leaves for a bit, allowing everyone to suffer in their despair and go a little mad. When Gloucester returns, he informs the group of the plot to kill Lear. Kent and the fool help Lear leave the hut and travel to Dover. Edgar and Gloucester are left in the hut. Cornwall announces that French troops are in England and that Gloucester is a traitor after finding out that Gloucester helped Lear escape. He sends servants out to find Gloucester. He sends Goneril and Edmund to warn Albany of the impending danger of the French. The servants quickly find Gloucester and return him to Cornwall. In response to Gloucester's betrayal and insult against Goneril and Regan, Cornwall gouges out Gloucester's eyes. One of Cornwall's servants, appalled by the torture, mortally wounds Cornwall. Regan then kills the servant. Gloucester calls out for Edmund, only to be told that Edmund was the one who turned him over. Act 4. Act 4 starts with Edgar agreeing to lead Gloucester to the cliff so he can throw himself off of it. As the act continues, we find out that Albany is on Gloucester and Lear's side and that Cornwall is now dead. Also, Goneril is in love with Edmund and intends to marry him. The reader learns more about Cordelia's love for her father, while Lear is in Dover sitting in shame of the way he treated Cordelia. Cordelia then sends out a search party for Lear. Edgar, still indecisive, leads Gloucester to the cliffs of Dover. In order to help his father out of his depression, Edgar tricks Gloucester into surviving his suicide attempt. A crazed Lear enters and rants about the problems of society. When the search party arrives, Lear runs away. Oswald appears shortly after, ready to kill Gloucester, but no. Edgar kills Oswald before he can hurt Gloucester. Edgar then finds a letter on Oswald's body, a love letter from Goneril to Edmund that also explains the plot on Albany's life. The act ends with Lear being reunited with Cordelia. 5 begins with Regan gossiping with Edmund about his relationship with Goneril. If you couldn't tell, Regan is also in love with Edmund. Edgar shares the letter that Oswald had to Albany. Albany begins to ready his troops. When Edmund is alone, he shares that he's playing both sisters and that he plans to kill Lear and Cordelia. The big battle ensues between the French and the British. The French army lost. Lear and Cordelia have also been captured. Alright, last scene of the play. Everybody dies. Yay! The end. Okay, but seriously, Edmund sends Lear and Cordelia to the prison with orders to kill them. Albany objects to all of this. He then calls for a fighter to prove Edmund's injustices through combat. Edgar, dressed in full armor, appears. He mortally wounds Edmund before revealing his identity, and his life is poured out. Gloucester dies after hearing the news. A messenger shares that Regan died due to poison from Goneril, and Goneril killed herself with a knife. Romeo and Juliet, anyone? Kent, undisguised, enters. Edmund repents and calls for the execution of Lear and Cordelia to be called off. He's too late. Lear comes back holding a dead Cordelia. He states that he killed the man who killed Cordelia. Edmund dies from his wound. Lear shares that the fool also died. Then Lear dies from his own grief. Albany plans to become the new ruler, and now it's truly the end of the play. One of the main symbols in King Lear is the storm. A powerful storm occurs a few times in the play. Act 2, Scene 4 is where Lear first runs out into the storm after he has an argument with his daughters, and then continues to spend most of Act 3 in said storm. The overall symbolism of the water and the rain tends to represent cleanliness, freedom, purity, and life. At this point in the play, Lear is beginning to finally understand the betrayal of his 2 eldest daughters compared to the betrayal that he had against his youngest daughter. The wind often symbolizes Lear's literal and figuratively going with the wind. He's currently been cast out both of his daughters' houses, and he's in the midst of a storm, so he's going in the wind in the sense that he's just going where life takes him. The lightning and thunder continuously foreshadows future destruction and despairs. Lightning can also symbolize shining light on a situation and ending any sense of ignorance. Again, this goes with Lear's realization of his betrayal of his daughters and his own betrayal against his youngest daughter. The storm as a whole can represent quite a few things. The storm is a physical representation of the chaos of Lear's mental state and his progression into madness. The storm also represents an intense power of nature, forcing Lear to realize that the lack of true power that humans have. In the quote, Let the great gods that keep this dreadful plunder overhead find out their enemies now. Tremble the wretch that hast within thee undivelled crimes, unwhipped of justice, hide thee, thou bloody hand, thou purged and thou symbol of virtue. Thou art incantus cat off to pieces shake, that under covert and covenanting seeming is practiced on man's life. Close pent-up guilt, revive your canceling continence and cry, these dreadful summoners grace. In this, he's talking about the storm and going against all criminals and those who have gone against the law. In the beginning, he says, let the great gods. In terms, this can mean a divine source, but this also makes sense that if he's referring to himself as the great gods, or great gods as people who have the power, thus stating that let the people with the power go against criminals. So in the end, you can say that Lear is comparing himself to this powerful storm. But the storm could also very well just represent the general chaos in England at the moment. One of the main themes of King Lear is the theme of order and therefore disorder. This can be viewed by looking at the family relationships. A nuclear or traditional family is seen as a man or a woman who are married with one or more biological children. The main families in the play are far from a typical structure. Lear has 3 daughters and no wife, while Gloucester's family, he has no wife, a legitimate son, and an illegitimate son. Shakespeare then continues to blame some of these major events on these unusual family structures. The Gloucesters specifically, or Edmund Gloucester specifically, turns to a life of betrayal due to his illegitimacy and the inequalities he has in society. Continuing with this theme, Lear and the Crown is also a very disorderly event. Lear decides to retire his position as king rather than having a new king be selected once Lear dies. This is going against the traditional order. Along with the crown typically goes to the eldest son, and Lear doesn't have any sons. Again, both of these go against the traditional way on how a new king is coronated. Lear as a person lacks any skills needed for understanding loyalty. This lack of understanding of loyalty and trust also leads to a disorder when it comes to Lear's interactions with other people. For example, his 2 most loyal followers, Cordelia and Kent, are banished, yet he trusts the man that he just met, referring to Kent in disguise, with a very important letter. Lear is unable to understand what true loyalty and how to trust people, and this disorder of traditional social cues leads to future problems down the line.